The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia is now in session. L'audience du Tribunal Pénal International pour l'ex-Yougoslavie est ouverte. Please be seated.
Registrar, kindly call the case.
This case number IT 0367T, the prosecutor versus Vojislav Šešelj. Thank you.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Registrar. Today is Tuesday. Good afternoon to everybody, to the OTP representatives, and to Mr. Šešelj. We are still at the stage of the closing arguments by the accused. You still have 3 hours and 40 minutes left, as I said last time. If we don't lose or waste any time today, including the breaks, we might be able to finish today with regard to the closing arguments, unless the prosecutor may have rebuttal evidence or closing arguments, but I fail to see what could be said, since everything that has been said so far by Mr. Šešelj was known to us through the filings and because of the closing brief. So we might be able to finish today, Mr. Šešelj. You may proceed. You still have 3 hours and 40 minutes.
I'm
not so sure, Mr. Antonetti, that you had already known all that I've said so far, and as for the prosecution, they are probably speechless by now, so they won't have a rebuttal. What could they possibly rebut from all I said? Nothing. Now it would be in order to shed in greater detail some light on the political circumstances that form the background of this case. We've seen documentary evidence about demands to issue an indictment against me, that everything should be done to prevent me from winning the Serbian elections, etc. Carlo Del Ponte named 2 people as asking that an indictment be brought against me, and the main one is, of course, Zoran Đinđić. But there were several other DOS party leaders only in Serbia, like Goran Svilanović, Mr. Čović, Miroljub Labus, and others. And the indictment was indeed issued without being supported properly, and the heap of papers accompanying the indictment could have been sufficient only to judge Kuon to issue an indictment and confirm it. It would not have sufficed to anyone else. And the prosecution started its investigation only after the indictment was brought. You can see that from the dates and witness statements that the prosecution has shown here. There have been several witnesses that had testified in the Milosevic case earlier, so the prosecution used their statements from that case or asked them again to give new statements. The overwhelming majority of witnesses provided statements only after the indictment was brought. So the indictment issued by the prosecution was not based on evidence and witness statements. Instead, the indictment, once issued, was an indicator how the witness statements should be adapted and adjusted, and how the evidence should be geared every witness interview was conducted with a certain purpose. The investigators already had the indictment before them, and they were just looking for support for it. Some were more skillful, others less. Some managed better, others fumbled and stumbled and got completely lost. But they collected some scraps of evidence that they could possibly fit into some paragraph in the indictment. This case is an essay on a given subject. A task was set, and the task that Gordeau mentioned in December 2006 was set already in 2000 in Serbia. When the regime changed in Serbia, the DOS party came into power with the help of Western intelligence powers and the huge amounts of money and all possible logistical support. And still they were unable to destroy the Serbian Radical Party. When I was already in The Hague, there was of course no mention of a speedy trial, although Carla Del Ponte had promised it back in 2003 when she was in Belgrade. I was kept waiting. Status conferences went along one after another every 4 months, and nothing. They were hoping they would manage to break me at some point and accept an appointed counsel. All of you hoped that, the tribunal, the registry and the prosecution. Already then, a psychological and mental warfare started against me on the 11th December 2003. The Deputy Registrar, David Tolbert, issues a decision in which, imagine this, the Deputy Registrar, in his decision, which is of administrative nature, invokes Resolution 827, dated 25 May 93, whereby the Security Council established the International Tribunal to prosecute persons responsible for serious violations of international humanitarian law, pending the restoration of peace. It looks like it's now the job of the registry and the Deputy Registrar. What does the registry have to do with the restoration of peace? And then he invokes the statute and the rules of detention, which do not govern these issues at all. He also refers to the need to protect the individual rights of detainees. So in the process of violating my rights, he invokes my rights. He says that the Security Council has expressed extreme concern, and that is year 1993, because of reports on war crimes, ethnic cleansing, conquests and withholding of territory. And he invokes the arguments for establishing this international tribunal, and then he says, bearing in mind that there are proceedings currently underway against Mr. Šešelj before this international tribunal concerning acts he committed while occupying a political position in the former Yugoslavia, and bearing in mind that this accused at the parliamentary elections scheduled for December 2003, and bearing in mind especially that the warden of the detention unit of the ICTY was informed that the accused had recently made statements for the press using detention premises, which statements have later been published in the media. And what was all this about? Of course, I talked to certain people, I made telephone calls to friends and acquaintances, and then one of them would retell something for the papers out of our conversations. Bearing in mind Article 63B of the Rules of Detention, which envisaged that the registrar may refuse a person wishing to visit a detainee if it is considered that the purpose of the visit is to obtain information that could be later published in the media, and that this rule stipulates that communication between the accused and other persons may be prohibited if there is reason to believe that such communication will result in the publishing of the accused's statements in the media, and especially if it undermines the ability of this tribunal to contribute to the restoration of peace. The Deputy Registrar does not indicate, by the way, at all which of my statements he is talking about. I had at that time received several visits by my family members and friends. And these people, when they return to Belgrade, are asked by journalists about my health. They say, it's fine. How am I doing in detention? They say, I'm fine. What am I doing? Most of the time I'm reading and writing books, etc. What else could they have said? What else did they have to say? Nothing. The registrar does not indicate what the problem was. I did call 2 or 3 journalists from here. That much is true, but they are my friends. I talk to them as well. I still call them occasionally sometimes. For instance, Vladan Dimic, editor-in-chief of the newspaper called Svedok, Witness, and a few others. But I never gave them interviews or press releases, nor does the Deputy Registrar claim I did. And in view of the fact that I was the object of great media attention, and reports that a person accused of crimes against humanity and war crimes, such as this accused, is in a position to help the current parliamentary electoral campaign in Serbia unhindered. So this is the problem, that I am helping the campaign. I am still helping that campaign. I am still on the Serbian Radical Party ballot for the elections, and I am top of the list. How can you forbid that? You can't. The Serbian consul came to me. I signed all the necessary forms. I am not a convict pending a final judgment. I cannot be denied any civil right except the right to freedom of movement. I am here because there was anxiety that I could flee, that I could commit a crime of similar nature, etc. That's why I was denied provisional release. But no other right can be denied to me. However, the Deputy Registrar seems to think otherwise. Then he goes on to say that the purpose of the DU premises is to provide for the accused's welfare, not to hinder this tribunal in its efforts to establish peace and security in the former Yugoslavia. And the fact that a detainee can communicate using the premises of the DU, using such communication to interfere in the electoral campaign in Serbia would probably interfere with the mandate of the tribunal. I invite the registry to give you this decision of 11 December 2003 so you can follow it in English if you are interested. In view of the fact that in finding a balance between the rights of the accused to communicate and to receive visits on the one hand, and the right of the ICTY to efficiently pursue its mandate and functions, on the other hand, it must be taken into account that the particular circumstances of this detainee require special measures to avoid potentially hazardous information leaking to the media, considering that so far this detainee has not been subject to any restrictions in his communication and visits. What could be hazardous about information to mass media? What is bad for you in the registry concerning the Serbian Radical Party? What could be hazardous to you is that the Serbian Radical Party wins or gets a good result in the elections because you want to destroy it. And based on all that, Deputy Registrar David Tolbert decides that all telephone communication be prohibited between the accused and other persons, except members of his family, consular and other representatives of his country, and a limited number of other persons, that all telephone communications be monitored except his communication with legal advisors, and that all persons be prohibited, save for his family, from visiting the accused, and also accepting his legal advisors, if any, and consular representatives. That all family visits should be approved as decided by the warden and other authorities. This, however, does not apply to written communication. That was the first decision. You are yet to see what the decisions that followed looked like. This is undeniable evidence that I was subjected here to political persecution. This whole case is of a political nature. On the Catholic Christmas, 25 January 2003, sometime in the afternoon, it could have been Sunday, if my memory serves me well, oh no, it was Friday. I called the head office of the Serbian Radical Party, and there I talked to some of the top party officials. I was on speakerphone, and there were several journalists present. I said just a few sentences about the upcoming elections. I did not divulge the names of protected witnesses. I didn't mention any names at all. I didn't mention any protected documents. I did not even refer to ICTY judges or prosecutors or anything. It was sometime on that Friday afternoon. Then came the Saturday and the Sunday. Over the weekend, those who review intercepts of telephone conversations and make transcripts submitted their report. And the next morning, before 8 a.m., I receive a piece of paper saying that until further notice, I am prohibited from using the telephone at all. And then on the 29th December, the decision comes down from Hans Holthaus, the registrar of the ICTY. He says, taking into account that the registry is decided to stop the detainees from abusing privileged communication, and in view of the upcoming elections in Serbia, considering that it could hinder the ICTY in re-establishing peace and security in the former Yugoslavia. First of all, this was not about privileged communication. It was about using a public pulpit, because if it was privileged communication, it could have not been monitored. At that time, I had only 2 lawyers, not officially my legal advisors, but the ICTY refused to register them because they wanted to impose on me their own people.
It goes on, bearing in mind that the parliamentary elections in Serbia were held on the 28th of December 2003, and bearing in mind that Mr. Vojislav Šešelj was one of the candidates standing in the election, and bearing in mind that the DU chief officer found out that the accused on the 25th of December 2003, before the election, abused the opportunity to communicate from the DU by giving statements to the media, which were then extensively published. That constitutes a serious violation on the part of the accused of the decision, and therefore another decision is issued that by 10th of January the accused is banned from any telephone communication with any other person except with his legal advisor, if he has one, and everybody knew that I didn't have one, and of course with diplomatic representatives. Now, this is a decision issued on the 29th of December, and you see what is underlying this decision. Not a single of those standard reasons is quoted. Instead, they say that my support for the Serbian Radical Party is undermining the efforts of this tribunal to introduce and keep peace in the Balkans. Then on 5th of January,
to je bilo od 29.
and that was on the 29th of December. And then on the 8th of January, the Deputy Registrar, David Tolbert, issues yet another decision. Bearing in mind everything aforementioned and invoking some of the provisions from the statute and the resolution, says the following: bearing in mind that the results of the parliamentary elections in Serbia, held on the 28th of December 2003, indicate that the political party led by the accused has won 82 seats out of a total of 250 seats in the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia, and taking into account that the activities in post-election period will probably be conducive to having the political party of the accused requesting additional activities in the government activities that came after the 28th December 2003 elections. In view of the wide coverage in the media, and having in mind that the accused is in such a position that he has no problems in conducting election campaign or being involved in post-electoral activities, the consequence thereof is the undermining of the mandate of this tribunal in its role in establishing and maintaining peace. In other words, my electoral campaign actually undermined the restoration of peace in the former Yugoslavia. Now, post-electoral activities, such as the discussion about the composition of the government, etc., is yet another reason for undermining the restoration of peace. This is all said by David Tolbert. As a result, he decides that for another 30 days, unless decided otherwise by the DU chief officer, to ban any form of communication between the accused and other persons, making exception again for my legal advisors, which I didn't have at the time, and other registered and diplomatic representatives. So I was prohibited from any form of communication, including family visits. Admittedly, the chief officer offered me to call my family. That happened in his office in the presence of interpreters, but I rejected his offer. On the 6th of February, the deputy registrar issues yet another decision and made reference, the usual references started from the Security Council resolution, the statute, and the proclaimed objectives of the ICTY. And he also reminds that in the previous decisions, when assessing the factors that could undermine the mandate of the ICTY, the reports in the media that the accused was charged with genocide, pay attention to this, genocide and war crimes, just as the accused is in a position to conduct parliamentary electoral campaigns without any hindrance at all. Now, what they put in or threw in here is a charge for genocide. Therefore, I had to look at the original in English. And there was no mention of genocide there. So somebody who was translating this just inserted the word genocide. Probably I was so popular among some people, and they felt that I am not charged enough, and they thought that they would like to add some other ingredients. This is just to draw your attention to the fact how your translation service operates. Now, David Tolbert reiterates that at the parliamentary elections in Serbia in December 2003, the party led by the accused won 82 seats in the parliament, and taking into account the possibility that post-electoral activities will probably result in a request on the part of his party to have the accused become involved in all their activities, so everything is being repeated, contained in the previous decisions. And then he says that bearing in mind that the accused is still exhibiting spiteful attitude towards this, he issues a new ban on any form of communication between myself and other individuals. That was on the 6th of February 2004. I published all this in the book, the Genocidal Diplomat Meron. Israeli diplomat Theodore Meron.
9. marta 2004.
Then we have a decision of 9 March 2004, signed again by David Tolbert. He repeats again everything that was stated in the previous decision, and then says that I am prone to being spiteful with regard to these issues. And this decision and the decision on communication ban, and therefore suggests that this ban be extended for another 30 days. The next decision comes on the 8th of April. All these disgusting things contained in the previous decisions are being repeated there, and the ban is extended for yet another 30 days. Then we have a decision of 7th of May, signed by David Tolbert again. It's a complete repetition, and everything is being extended once more. And then we have a decision of 9th of June, containing all the same language, and it provides for an extension of ban. This decision was rescinded only on the 30th of June 2004. Now, you see here some new evidence in the form of these decisions, which I have presented to you in such an illustrious manner. They speak of the fact that this tribunal is politically motivated, and I demonstrated to you which motives underlie the case against me. All of this is in line with what is written in Carla Del Ponte's book about the political nature of this tribunal and how the indictment was commissioned and issued. It also coincides with what Florence Altman speaks about in her book, and that is how the Western intelligence services use the ICTY as their instrument. Parallel with that, there is witch hunt against the Serbian Radical Party in Serbia. A widespread campaign was organized to recruit some of our party officials. The first information to that effect was when I heard that Aleksandar Vučić met a famous U.S. intelligence officer, Mojton Abramović. And you know who betrayed Aleksandar Vučić? James Lyon was the one. Now then, witch hunt against Tomislav Nikolić started in 2005. Nataša Kandić publicly stated that Tomislav Nikolić, as a volunteer of the Serbia Radical Party in 1991 in eastern Slavonia, whether in Ernestinovo or Lastovo, had killed some old women. Tomislav Nikolić panicked, because if that had really happened, I would have known about that. He would have told me that, because we were very close friends. But he was panicking because he realized that once you accuse someone in public, it is very difficult to defend oneself. He was so flustered and started giving some statements against The Hague, and I had to get in touch with him and calm him down. Now, since Slobodan Miljković Šugar came with a group of trained volunteers in a helicopter in the area of Shamac and was attached to the 17th tactical group, and then was accused of the crimes at the location of Crkvina, he went back to Serbia. After he went back to Shamac in 1992, he apparently joined the Serbian Radical Party, and he reached an agreement with the local authorities in Shamac to go to the front line again, but this time for money. And he also agreed to come with a group of volunteers in order to fulfill certain tasks. In Kragujevac, Tomislav Nikolic organized a celebration to see off this unit without the knowledge of the war staff in Belgrade. Ljubiša Petković had never been informed about this group going to the front, and I told you that in 2003 Slobodan Miljković was expelled from the party when he slapped Jovan Savić, a president of the local board. These two elements were used to attack Tomislav Nikolic, and he was, as a result, psychologically shattered. He couldn't have known what Miljković was going to do in Shamac, and there was no connection with these events. It wasn't even proved that any old women were killed in Ernestinovo or elsewhere, let alone that Tomislav Nikolic had something to do with that. If that happened, it would have been in my indictment. So in such a state of mind, he's surrounded by representatives of the ICTY, and eventually he establishes contacts with Carla Terbonde. He met her at least once in Strasbourg during the session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I have eyewitnesses to that. And this meeting of theirs was so cordial and happened in front of all other deputies, which led them to believe that they knew each other very well. Then apparently he met David Tolbert in Budapest, who was first deputy registrar, and then soon thereafter was transferred to the position of deputy prosecutor. Is that possible? Obviously, this is possible in the ICTY. Tomislav Nikolic met him in Budapest again during some session of the Council of Europe. I heard about this encounter. When I asked him about it, he told me that he was interested in my trial, and he asked him why was I indicted by the tribunal at all. Dragan Todorovic was present during this conversation. He became flustered and fumbled and didn't provide any clear answer to that. Luckily, a very brave man called Julian Assange emerged in Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking area. He's called Julian Assange, and through his site called WikiLeaks, he revealed a huge amount of documents from the US diplomatic correspondence. I wrote a book of more than 1,000 pages called WikiLeaks Tells Me. I published all the dispatches that you can find on WikiLeaks, where there's mention of myself, of the Serbian Radical Party, and the traitors Tomislav Nikolic and Aleksandar Vučić, and a selection of dispatches from where the ICTY is being mentioned. I actually chose only those, not all of them, but only those that are most compromising for the ICTY. We can see how Timothy McFadden spied on Slobodan Milosevic for the account of the Americans, how he divulged his written communication with his wife. He revealed information of the conversations that were wiretapped in his cell. He provided his own assessment of some of the personal characteristics of Slobodan Milosevic.
There is plenty other evidence from which it is obvious that the ICTY is a mere tool in the hands of Western intelligence services. However, very, very fortunately, this dispatch turned up from the American Embassy in Paris that did me a priceless favor with the help of this fumbling Maurice Gordeau-Montagne. And I have key evidence about the nature of this trial. If this were a real tribunal, gentlemen, if you were acting as real judges, as soon as that dispatch became public, you would have made the decision to stop this trial, because its integrity has been destroyed. After this dispatch by the American Embassy in Paris, containing the statement of Maurice Gordeau-Montagne, there is no integrity in this trial anymore. This trial is over. It's just that nobody told you. I triumphed in this case. I've proven that all of this is just a huge political intrigue. But you've done nothing. You were willing participants in this. That's your problem.
Ovim Wikileaksovim dokumentima
in the WikiLeaks documents, we find many more details about the way Tomislav Nikolic and Aleksandar Vučić were recruited, about the expectations of their masters in the West in the event they ever get into power, what they are prepared to do. They are prepared to do much worse than Boris Tadic and the Democratic Party. They have no scruples to speak of anymore. And a notorious French spy master, Arnaud Danjean, was very much involved in this. He connected them with Stanko Subotic and Stane Žabac. Stankovic participated with his money. So did the German government, that usually places its funds through various charity organizations. Danjean was personally involved, and it seems that a part of the money that was extracted from Gaddafi was given to Tomislav Nikolic and Aleksandar Vučić. The greatest part of the money went to Nicolas Sarkozy, of course. All these are secret funds. It's difficult to expose. But since Gaddafi's fall, we've had information in the public domain that this is very commonplace indeed. These traitors, on the orders of their masters, put out a story about me 2 years ago that I had ordered Nikolic's killing. You know why that calculation was made? All the media in Serbia published it, saying that there is information I had ordered Nikolic is murdered. Supposedly, one of the members of the Zemun clan made a statement about that, and the tribunal was then supposed to make a decision to stop all my communication with the outside world. And my wife was even accused of conveying this commission to a certain Simovic to commit the murder. Tomislav Nikolic even remembered, quote unquote, how I earlier ordered people to be murdered through Aleksandar Vučić. However, the ICTY did not react. And I thought a long time why it did nothing. And I came to the conclusion that it's because the operation to destroy my heart had long been underway, so this would have been superfluous and a bit unsavory. It's much more efficient because whenever they use these disciplinary measures against me, I am always defiant and I resist and you don't succeed. But when they destroy my heart, I can't breathe. I'm still defiant. I still fight. But I find it hard to breathe. That's it. It's easier to stop me by physical means than by psychological means. Psychologically, I still rule over all the Hague Tribunal and all the dark forces that stand behind it.
U toj političkoj pozadini
against this political background, it's interesting that all the Western forces were involved in this conspiracy, the US, the UK, France, Germany. Their intelligence services made a great contribution. They were involved in the attempt to break up the Serbian Radical Party. They took Tomislav Nikolic and Aleksandar Vučić as their protégés, although they treat Tomislav Nikolic as something for a one-off use only. In their internal communications, they reveal him as a man who had purchased his university degree. We have several agencies in Serbia, formally speaking, to fight corruption. Do you think that any of these agencies investigated how he had become a master of economics without ever taking an exam? No, not even the current regime is willing to do that. The current regime wants to see Nikolic's party in the parliament to fill a gap here or there, although not to be very strong. They want his party just to be around to get them a parliamentary majority when they need it. That's his role. And Nikolic would do anything that Arnaud Danjean or some of the other Western spy masters that I'm not aware of yet tell him to do. I found only about those who have been blown already. Concerning those who have not yet been blown, I don't have enough information. I don't mention a single name unless I have proof. For all that I've said so far, I have ample proof. My evidence cannot be refuted. Who can deny the diplomatic dispatches from the U.S. Embassy in Paris to Washington? Who can dispute the role of Arnaud Danjean in all these dirty dealings? Who can dispute the role of any other participant, Maurice Gourdon-Montagne, for instance? Nobody. You can just sit quietly listening to all of this. Now I'd like to move to another area that I have not yet elaborated in the initial stages of my closing argument. The OTP is straining to prove that my alleged hate speech may constitute the crime of persecution. And the members of the trial chamber are inclined to them, especially the majority on the trial chamber. And the prosecutor invokes the Nahimani et al. Case. The judges also refer to that case. That is the jurisprudence of the ICTR, which dealt with genocide, indisputably established genocide, whereas under the Convention on Genocide, public and open call to genocide is punishable even if genocide did not actually happen. But that's only concerning genocide. However, in the appeals judgment in Nahimani et al., the same acts that had been qualified as genocide were also qualified as persecution, extermination, murder, etc. I read the judgment a long time ago. I don't remember anymore. Let's see the jurisprudence of the ICTY concerning the same issue. Let me remind you of the Dario Kordic and Mario Čerkes case.
Podignuta optužnica Haškog tribunala.
The ICTY indicted them on 30th September 1998.
I u toj optužnici pod tačkom 1
Para 1 of that indictment, count 1 of that indictment is persecution as crime against humanity. Persecution is a broader definition of all crimes against humanity. In fact, it's a sui generis concept. And persecution can also be an individual crime against humanity. In paragraph 37 of their indictment, item C says that the campaign of widespread and systematic persecution was committed and executed in the following ways. And then a whole series of these ways is enumerated, including C, by encouraging, inciting, and conducting a propaganda of hatred, mistrust, and rift on ethnic, national, religious grounds by propaganda, speech, and in other ways. So it's a comprehensive charge, as if it had been phrased in preparation for me. However, on 26 February 2001, the trial chamber, consisting of Judge Richard May, Judge Mohammed Benuna, and Judge Patrick Robinson, hands down the judgment, in which paragraph 209 deals with the campaign of hatred on ethnic and other grounds, and then it specifies. The trial chamber notes that the indictment against Dario Kordic is the first indictment in the history of the International Tribunal where this act was charged as a crime against humanity. The trial chamber, however, finds that this act, as cited in the indictment, does not constitute persecution as crime against humanity per se. Nowhere else in the statute of the ICTY has it been quoted as a crime against humanity. And most importantly, it does not attain the same level of gravity as the other acts stated in Article 5. Furthermore, the criminal prohibition against hate speech has not become a standard of international criminal law. That is why convicting the accused of this crime as persecution would violate the principle of legality. You were trying here prominent Croatian statesman, one of the highest officials of the Croatian community of Herceg-Bosna.
Napomeni.
In the footnote 271, it says, the trial chamber accepts that direct and open call to genocide is a criminal act under Article 43C of the statute. However, the act charged against the accused in the indictment is largely below the standard of that crime. I do not deny myself that open and direct call to genocide is a criminal act punishable under the Convention on Genocide. However, direct and open call to war crimes and crimes against humanity cannot have the same treatment as the crime, again, a crime of calling to genocide. That is the essence. That settles all the problems. In a new note, it says, that's note 272, it says criminal prosecution of acts of speech that do not reach the level of incitement has weak support in the international jurisprudence. In the Streicher case, the International Tribunal found the accused guilty because he had called the German people to active persecution. However, the International Military Court decided that his acts, such as publishing an anti-Semite magazine, constituted the act of incitement to persecution and murder. Similarly, in the Akayesu case, the ICTR found the accused guilty of direct and open calling to commission of genocide. Furthermore, the only act of speech that is explicitly criminalized under the statute of the International Military Court, the law number 10 of the Control Council, the statute of the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, and the ICTR, and the ICC, is direct and open incitement to genocide. In this part, the trial judgment was confirmed by the appeals chamber. In these proceedings, the prosecution did not even try to contest this. In the same note, it says, there is fierce resistance in conventional law in this area, and it shows that such speech does not necessarily have to be considered a crime according to international customs law. In the International Convention on the Elimination of All Kinds of Racial Discrimination, it says that parties that are parties to the convention must treat as a crime punishable by law any spreading of ideas based on racial superiority or hatred and incitement to racial discrimination. Therefore, in the international customs law, racial hatred and racial discrimination are emphasized, as they are in the British House of Lords. Only that hatred is incriminated and sanctioned, not squabbling between racial not squabbling between ethnic and religious groups, not racial groups. There are no racial differences between Serbs, Croats, Macedonians, Albanians, etc. There is absolutely no racial distinction there.
Član 20.
Article 20 of the International Pact on Civic and Political Rights, which deals with a ban on war propaganda, determines that every kind of war propaganda has to be banned and prohibited by law. That every form of advocating racial or religious hatred that instigates to discrimination, conflict or violence must be banned by law. You will find that in the International Pact. However, it goes on to say, although according to the original draft of Article 20, that was the case. According to its final draft, it has to be banned by law, but not by criminal law. Look at that. This is what you will find on page 58 of the trial judgment. It has to be banned by law, but not by criminal law. By what law? Perhaps by disciplinary law, misdemeanor law. Maybe it should be punishable by a pecuniary sentence, perhaps an imprisonment up to 60 days. Misdemeanor court is a body of administrative power, not judicial power. For example, in Serbia, it is an administrative body which can punish offenders with up to 60 days imprisonment, not more. If you read Manfred Novak's book entitled Pact of the United Nations on Civic and Political Rights, and it was published in 1963, you will find the basis for that. You will find here also that a number of states has voiced their caveat about the interpretation of these provisions. So this is still in dispute in the international customs law. If there is something in dispute, it cannot be applied by this tribunal. In the following footnote, it says, a broad spectrum of legal approaches to the bans and prohibition to instigation or spreading of hatred, mistrust and discords on political, racial, religious basis by propaganda, speeches or in other ways also shows that there is no international consensus on the criminalization of the act at the level of the international customs law. You, as a trial chamber, mentioned laws of the former Yugoslavia. The Serbian laws also probably provide for a ban on the spreading of religious and national hatred. The sentence for that is 10 to 5 years. But this is the Yugoslav, or rather Serbian national law. This is not part of the international law, so therefore you cannot apply it. You cannot prosecute me here for a traffic offense that I may have committed in Serbia when I was drunk driving. I don't drink, but I'm giving you this as a drastic example. Germany and Canada are on the two opposite sides of that spectrum, although in many other countries, including the former Yugoslavia and the United States of America, there is some aspect of the regulation of such speech which may incite hatred. The Constitution of the South African Republic, Article 16C, excludes the hate speech as an instigation to wrongdoing. The criminal law of Canada, Article 319, Para 2, puts a ban on voicing claims that might instigate hatred against people of different race, nationality or religion. The criminal law of France also says that those who issue publications or in any other way to provoke discrimination, hatred or violence against a person or a group of persons because of their origin or because of their affiliation or non-affiliation to an ethnic group, nation, race or religion shall be punished by a sentence of up to 1 year in prison and a pecuniary fine. You, Mr. Antonetti, know only too well, much better than I do, that this is part of the criminal law of France. And that this cannot constitute a crime against humanity. The Article 133 of the Federal Criminal Law of Yugoslavia is again mentioned here as an article putting a ban on publishing such and disseminating such information which could harm the unity of and brotherhood of the nations of Yugoslavia. The German law also says that if some words degrade or belittle parts of the population in a way that which will probably disturb public law and order. The United States of America is an exception to the scope of guarantees to free speech. Speeches that spread hatred is protected by the Constitution of the United States of America if they do not incite violence. This is a very high threshold in the American jurisprudence, and I have tried to explain to you that the level of instigation may be reached only if the instigation has largely contributed to the perpetration of a crime. We cannot talk about assumptions here. For example, if I hold a speech in Belgrade or Pirot and somebody rapes or kills on the other bank of the Drina, sometimes before my speech, sometimes after my speech, and it is not relevant and it is not proven how my speech may have affected that crime. Still, I am held responsible for somebody having committed that crime of rape or murder. This is nonsense. Are you now going to issue a decision that will go against the decision in the Kordic and Cherkes case? Maybe the trial chamber in the Kordic and Cherkes case held on to its principles as regards the hate speech because they had a lot of other elements that contributed to the decision and they didn't have to evoke the hate speech. In my case, you don't have anything else. Participation in war is not a crime. Making a contribution to the Serbian war efforts is not a crime. The Serbian side was not the aggressor side in the war. When you listen to my speeches, can you find a single fragment which constitutes an essential contribution to the perpetration of a single crime? The prosecution has not conducted a serious investigation. We have already seen that. Its investigation was also quite late. First they issued the indictment and then they carried out the investigation. And then they added on to the indictment and then they subtracted some parts of the indictment because they had to. The prosecution has forgotten to take into account one thing. They didn't want to watch the videotapes of my public speeches. If they had been a bit more diligent, if they had been a bit more up to the speed, they would have arrived at some evidence and proof that I quoted a favorite song of mine in over 100 rallies, and that song is over 200 years old. And while I was quoting those verses, the audience started applauding me frenetically because the verses are strong, decisive. I'm going to read several verses from that song to you. I gladly recited those verses. I knew them by heart at that time. However, after such a long time, I can no longer remember. I can no longer rely on my memory, so I'd better read it, I suppose. I have just been warned that I should read slowly, and I'll do that. Let us go, the children of the homeland. The day of the glory has arrived. A blood-stained flag is waving against sun. Do you hear the bloodthirsty army that is coming? We're talking about the enemy army. They are arriving to slaughter our children in our arms. To arms, citizens, let's form battalions. Advance, advance. Let the soiled blood, I mean the enemy blood, fill the traces of our steps. A love for the homeland, the sacred love for the homeland. May you lead us, may you make our muscles stronger. Freedom, sweet freedom. Fight along with your defenders. Rally below our banners and let your enemies die. After they see your triumph and our glory, let us close our ranks. When our fathers are no longer with us, we will find their dust, and we will find the traces of their pride. And we will not be jealous that we have survived them. We will be less jealous that we have survived them than to have to share their coffins. We will be proud to defend them. We will be proud to follow them. To arms, citizens, let's form battalions, advance, advance, and let the soiled blood fill the traces of our steps. What does the mob of slaves want from us? And this is a reference to our enemy. The mob of traitors. They have been betrayed by their own governments. Who are these awful chains for? The chains that have long been prepared for the Serbs, that were prepared for the Croatian Federal Unit and the Bosnian Federal Unit, but the Serbs stood up to that. Mr. Antonetti, I'm sure that you have recognized the verses as soon as I started reciting them. This is the French national anthem, the Marseillaise.
Ovo je pesma.
And this is the song that I used to be able to recite off the top of my head. I did not read the whole of it now, but I used to recite all of it once. Why did they never mention that I recited that song in my speeches? What prevented them from doing that? This is the way one speaks when we're at war. We are not supposed to commend the enemy. Imagine what you, French people, used to say about the enemy, the German enemy, when they attacked you. Or you, Danes, when were you attacked? What year? Or you Italians, when Germans occupied half of Italy? You cannot speak nicely about your enemy, can you? And also people are joking with me from the moment they heard that a pacemaker had been given to me, and it's not a pacemaker, it's something else. But people started calling me a peacemaker. They want to portray me as a peacemaker. Are you trying me here? Am I on trial because I'm not a peacemaker? Because I'm not a peace-loving person? That's why you are trying me. I am not a peace-loving person. Am I on trial because I'm an aggressive person, that I have an aggressive character? It's my right to be aggressive. If any of my aggressivity is punishable, then I should be tried before my local court in Belgrade, not before an international court.
Šešelj, the time has come for a break. We're going to break for 30 minutes. We shall reconvene at 4 o'clock.